Hello and welcome to this is the American Security Project's first webinar of our series, Looking Beyond the First 100 Days, Challenges and Opportunities for a New Biden Administration. I see participants coming in. I'm going to wait one more minute as everybody is brought into the system. We've got a great group here today and a great group of panelists. We've been informed that Congressman Langevin is en route from Rhode Island to Washington, D.C. For the previously unscheduled session that will start, I believe, tonight. So we're still awaiting him. We had heard he's trying to log in and join our call here from on the road, but he is not yet on. As soon as he does come on, we will get started. We will bring him in. But as we are running up against time, and we want to make sure we respect everybody else's time here and keep this to just an hour, we will go ahead and get started. To introduce myself, I am Andrew Holland, the Chief Operating Officer of the American Security Project. We are a nonpartisan national security think tank. Our motto is vision, strategy, and dialogue. And so what that means is we like to look beyond the horizon, think about the challenges and opportunities that are coming to the United States, map out a strategy for what to do about those, and then have a dialogue about the best way to bring that forward across party lines, across nations, and to go forward as we come. Wonderful. I see Congressman Langevin connecting here en route. I see that you are, Congressman, I see the familiar background of the Acela train. Is that right? I see him
Hello,
coming in here.
Hello there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. Hope I'm on the train, so hope this is going to go okay. I was trying to connect with my Bluetooth, but unfortunately it's not working. So we're going to have to do direct to the iPad, but hopefully it works out okay.
It's great. We see you and we have no problem getting you coming in here. We really appreciate you being with us. I was just introducing the American Security Project, so your timing is impeccable, and we'll go ahead and get started here. We have a great group of participants here, about 56 participants I see lined up. I'm going to introduce our panel, and then I'm going to ask each of them to speak, to give introductory remarks on the topic of climate change and national security, and then we'll go from there. Our first speaker today will be Congressman Jim Langevin. Recognized as a national and party leader on national security, healthcare, and cybersecurity, he has dedicated many years of public service to the people of Rhode Island. He's a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, where he's been chairman of the Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee. That's where he has been a leader in pushing the bipartisan push to support the military's action on climate through multiple National Defense Authorizations Acts. And that's why we wanted him in particular to be here with us. Ambassador Anniken Krutnes is Norway's ambassador to the United States. She's an expert on security policy, law of the sea, and Arctic issues. She served with the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1994. Only a recent arrival to the United States, I believe September, to the United States. Most relevant, though, to today's conversation, she was also Norway's ambassador for Arctic and Antarctic affairs. Vice Admiral Lee Gunn served in the U.S. Navy for 35 years. His last active duty assignment was Inspector General of the Department of the Navy, where, together with his Marine deputy, he was responsible for the department's overall inspection program and its assessment of readiness, training, and quality of service. Vice Admiral Gunn currently serves on ASP's board of directors, and he was president of the Institute for Public Affairs at CNA, and he also serves on the military advisory board there. Alexandra Hackbarth is the Director of Climate and Energy Security at ASP. Her research examines the national security implications of climate change with a focus on China and strategic rivalry. As part of her graduate work, Alex studied at Tsinghua University in Beijing, where she focused her studies on China's environmental and foreign policies. We're really excited to have a great conversation today, and I'd encourage all of our participants also to sign up for our events tomorrow and Thursday as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Congressman Jim Langevin. We are really excited to have you with us, and hope you can give us 5 or so minutes of remarks on what you see coming in the new Congress and the new administration on climate change, national security, and Congress's role in this. Thank you for being with us, sir.
You bet, Andrew. Good afternoon. I hope everyone's going to be able to hear me okay. If you haven't been told already, I'm joining you live from the Acela train, going from Rhode Island to Washington. For the most part, I've been driving back and forth to DC, but this is one of the only times I've taken the train in my 20 years in Congress. I've only done it a handful of times, but probably a little safer option than flying, and so giving that a try for today. But in any event, I'm very thrilled to be joining you today, and just want to thank Andrew for the kind introduction. Looking forward to the comments from the other panelists and great discussion here later on. But with all the challenges that we have going on in the world, it seems that climate change had taken a backseat during the last 4 years of the current administration. And so I'm excited about how that's going to change in the upcoming Biden administration. So, we've been trying to make inroads here and there, despite the political environment of the last 4 years. And we've had some successes, and I expect now, this is going to be a breath of fresh air to so many people with the new administration coming in. But let me start out by just thanking you, Andrew, and the American Security Project for organizing this event and bringing us together to focus on the critical topic of climate security. I'm sure you're honored to join this distinguished panel that includes U.S. Ambassador Anniken Krutnes, Vice Admiral Lee Gunn, and ASP Director of Climate and Energy Security, Alex Hackbarth. And so I acknowledge their contributions to the issue of climate change and look forward to their comments today. As we all know, the footprint of the Department of Defense is massive. DoD is America's largest employer and maintains over 500,000 facilities on almost 5,000 sites across the globe. So additionally, each year the department is entrusted with a robust budget to project and protect the interests of the United States. This year alone, that budget totals approximately $740 billion. So it's certainly significant. The defense community has known for over a decade that climate change is a threat to national security. So this is not new. This has been around for several years now, as they've acknowledged. As early as 2008, the department, under the leadership of President George W. Bush, put forth a national defense strategy that recognized that, and I quote, the need to tackle climate change while managing increased energy demands. So then carry on forward, the Obama administration focused on federal leadership in environmental, energy, and economic performance, and the department addressed climate change in both 2014 and the 2014 Climate Change Adaptation Roadmap, as well as the 2014 Strategic Sustainability Performance Plan. However, as I mentioned earlier, due to political pressure, the department really has been slow to confront the threat of climate change publicly over the last 4 years, refusing to even say the words climate change, which has been beyond frustrating, as you can imagine. But as former Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, Gordon Sullivan, has stated, and I quote, "Climate instability will lead to instability in geopolitics and impact American military operations around the world," end quote. And I couldn't agree more. He's spot on. So the reality is We need to prepare for climate refugees fleeing from their homes that have been left uninhabitable. We need to look at new geographic realities, including a much more accessible Arctic, and we need to factor these realities into our strategy and our budgeting going forward. So I'm proud to say that I've been fighting to prioritize climate change in the DoD for years now. Some of the big successes came in the last couple of years. In 2017, just by way of example, I led an amendment in the FY18 National Defense Authorization Act that expressed the sense of Congress that climate change is a national security threat. That was no small effort, but it was a bipartisan effort, and I was pleased with the outcome. So the amendment passed in a bipartisan way through the Republican-controlled House Armed Services Committee, and when one of my Republican colleagues, Congressman Perry, led an effort to remove the amendment on the House floor, we needed 23 Republicans to join with us to prevent that amendment from being stripped out. That language being stripped out. I was fully expecting, because they controlled the House floor, that we could lose that vote. But in fact, we actually got 46 Republicans who voted with Democrats to keep the climate change provision in the NDAA. So I think that is significant, and I highlight that clearly this is the issue of climate change for some of the Republican colleagues. It is becoming more and more of a bipartisan issue. It's not just a Democratic issue. This is the realities of climate change are being recognized by many of my Republican colleagues as well, and we welcome them to the effort, of course. So, in addition to putting Congress on record as viewing climate change as a national security threat, the amendment also required the Secretary of Defense to provide an assessment of and recommendations to mitigate vulnerabilities at the top 10 most threatened military installations in each service. The department released an initial report in 2019 that, while incomplete, it revealed that over half of the 79 military installations examined are vulnerable to flooding, to droughts, and to wildfire. Now, unfortunately, we've already seen the enormous costs incurred when military installations are in the path of Mother Nature's wrath. Just in the last few years, the department has had to spend billions in disaster response at U.S. bases. Just a few examples: $3.6 billion after the Hurricane Florence slammed into Camp Lejeune, and then the surrounding area. Then $3 billion after Hurricane Michael demolished several areas of Tyndall Air Force Base, and approximately $1 billion after a 500-year flood ravaged Offutt Air Force Base. So the simple reality is we just cannot afford to ignore climate change any longer. In the NDAA that just became law on January 1st, I led an initiative that requires the Department of Defense to update its climate change adaptation roadmap for the first time in over 6 years, and provide a strategy document that addresses climate change with specific actionable steps for implementation. And additionally, I'm really thrilled that the incoming Biden administration has already signaled the importance of addressing climate change as a national security threat with the appointment of Secretary John Kerry as the new special presidential envoy for climate change. I think this appointment is particularly indicative of the administration's commitment as it comes to the seat on the National Security Council. And last but not least, and I think we're all thrilled to hear this news. Clearly, President Biden has already said that the United States will be rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. So I'm sure it's going to be a welcome change on the international stage that the United States is officially rejoining the international effort to combat climate change, and being part of the Paris Climate Accords is a major development, which I'm excited about. So with that, I'll stop there. I'm just excited to assist the administration as it works to advance climate security policy in the coming years. And I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists and then getting to questions. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you. You really have been a great leader on this issue. Ambassador Krutnes, over to you. Thanks for being with us. Norway, of course, has a special role as both a NATO ally and an Arctic state. Thanks for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Congressman and fellow panelists. And thanks to the American Security Project for once again raising this vital issue of climate security. We really appreciate the work you do. As an Arctic country, we see the effects of climate change to an alarming degree. You might know that the Arctic is warming about twice as fast as the global average. The extent of the sea ice cover has decreased sharply over the last 30 years. And changes in sea ice have impact on species such as fish, seabirds, seals, whales, polar bears. This is very alarming. I want to raise the significance of the Arctic Council in this regard. The Arctic Council has for more than 20 years served as the key international arena for discussion and collaboration on Arctic issues. They have a lot of knowledge and a lot of scientific research on the effects of climate change. And the Council provides a platform for addressing cross-border issues in the region. The Arctic Council has been instrumental in developing new knowledge on climate change in the Arctic, and all 8 countries, including Russia, the Nordic countries, Canada and the US, have cooperated and collaborated on getting this knowledge on the climate change in the Arctic. And I want to highlight especially the agreement in the Arctic on reducing emissions on black carbon and methane. Black carbon is one of the most dangerous climate gases when it comes to the melting of snow and ice. The US has not reported on their emissions or their reductions on emissions the last year, and we are looking forward to the new administration, and we're hopeful that the US also will start reporting on this important agreement on the reduction of these climate gases. Scientists are warning us that the negative consequences of climate change can accelerate dramatically if we do not limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And the urgency of this requires immediate and concerted action. It is therefore encouraging to see that the Biden administration will elevate climate change as a national security priority. This is in line with Norway's thinking, and of course we look very much forward to cooperating with the US on this extremely important topic. The President-elect and Congressman Langevin just did the same, point out that climate change poses a serious threat to national security as well as global stability and security. And it is good to see that the President-elect has some very concrete measures, such as commissioning a national intelligence estimate on the national and economic security and climate change. We have missed the leadership of the US in international climate negotiations. We regretted that the US withdrew from the Paris Agreement, and we look forward to the day they are back and that President Biden tells the world that the US once again is part of the global community fighting climate change. We are also encouraged to see John Kerry as a climate envoy. In the context of climate and security, the UN is very important. And Norway has just assumed its seats on the new UN Security Council just a few days ago. And well, having a seat there is in line with our long-term policy of supporting UN and supporting multilateral cooperation. And assessing climate risk is a vital part of conflict prevention agenda. The member states, the UN Secretariat, the Security Council, and the leadership of UN operations must factor climate-related risks and their implications for peace and security into all conflict prevention, their peacekeeping and their peace building activities. And we support the call for the UN Secretary General to present a biannual report on climate and security, and to appoint a special representative on climate change and security. Not all of the Council's members, the Security Council members, acknowledge the link between climate change and security. Norway will work to increase understanding of the threat that climate change poses to international peace and security, and to ensure that this is recognized in the Security Council's work. Severe climate change can have catastrophic implications, like violent conflicts, more poverty, migration, extreme weather conditions, rising sea level, more flooding, more drought, and more wildfires. These are threats that affect the whole world and has a major security risk of our generation. If we do not reduce emissions and build more resilient societies, this risk will carry over for generations to come. And with that, I say thank you, and I'm looking forward to the following discussion. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you. Admiral Gunn, you've been working in the area of climate change and national security for 15 years now, I think.
That's right.
So you've been, you know this issue inside and out, and you've been tracking it closely. I'm excited to hear from you what you think can be done in the coming administration, should be done, and over to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'd like to begin by echoing and thanking both Ambassador Krutnes and Congressman Langevin. They have said just the right things, I think, to kick off this conversation. I'd like to address 3 quick points. One is geographic, one is the national security connection to climate change itself, and the third is about what I see as the mood of the American people. On the geographic piece, let's shift for a moment from Norway and Northern Europe, terribly important, to South and Southeast Asia. Beginning on the west with Pakistan and India, and coming right around the curve, ending up in Vietnam and the Philippines, Western Indonesia, Malaysia. Those nations are beginning to feel a disproportionate set of effects of the changing climate. It doesn't take much. There are 2 billion people or so there, because I'm not including China. If we included China, it would be more than half of the world's population. And these people not only live there, but they feed there and feed each other. So a relatively modest sea level rise, which is how you'd probably characterize that in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, can have a devastating effect on not only Bangladesh and Vietnam, but also their ability to produce the foodstuffs on which so many people in that region depend. This really matters to the United States, because security, stability, and the ability to conduct commerce is important to America's economic strength. Now, point 2 is the connection that both the ambassador and the congressman have made between climate change and national security. I see that there's something more there that is probably worth mentioning. America's overall national security depends, of course, on our military strength, but also on our economic strength, the strength of our ideals, and our ability to interpret those ideals diplomatically throughout the world. But back to the military piece for a moment. As all those things, those elements, those pillars of national security are being affected by climate change, there are some very profound and specific effects on the US military. Congressman Langevin has talked with great knowledge about some of those, particularly the threats to the American infrastructure for the military operations, military forces on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast with regard to sea level rise and the increasing strength of storms. But beyond that, readiness and training are affected by climate change as well. The availability of training ranges and the ability to use live ordnance, conduct live fire operations can be reduced, has been reduced, is consistently being reduced by the threat of wildfires that are attendant to the extreme drought in the Southwest. The floods in the Midwest extending into Louisiana has caused, for example, the loss periodically of the jungle training ranges for the Army in Louisiana as places for training for fairly extensive periods of time. Also, the third item on military readiness has to do with the availability to conduct missions. Humanitarian missions, both inside the United States and around the world, have been increasing for some time for the US military. As a matter of fact, beginning in 2008, the National Defense Authorization Act and the elements of directives on national security recognized humanitarian assistance and disaster response as official missions of the US military. Therefore, the military could plan, train, equip, and deploy military forces as part of the overall mission. But in the United States, the military has been fighting fires, has been rescuing people, not just the National Guard and the Air Guard, but also the regular forces, rescuing people from floods and the like. All of those things are terribly important, and I got to tell you that after 35 years with sailors and Marines, they're not happier doing anything else than they are helping people. But the fact is, if you're spending your time and expending your resources helping people, as they increasingly are, that means that you don't have the time necessarily that you'd like to have in order to enable you to conduct military operation training. So the demands on the mission are the third item with regard to defense. Readiness and training, very important, and the actual conduct of missions and the need to deploy for those missions domestically and internationally. The last thing I'd like to say is Ambassador Krutnes is exactly right. Congressman Langevin is exactly right. It was a horrible mistake, at least in Gunn's estimation, for the United States government to leave the Paris Accords, the leaving of which actually was finalized on the day before the November election this year. I'm really excited that John Kerry is going to be the ambassador for climate. He is, after all, a founding member in the American Security Project and remains a good friend and a board member of the American Security Project. We're pretty fired up about that. But I get to travel around the country speaking about climate change issues with relation to national security, and therefore I'm often privileged to talk to audiences who are reluctant to listen to other messengers, because it's not true with a senior military officer that the audience might believe that you have another agenda. Certainly not as true as it is with some of the other messengers who bring the same kind of ideas, particularly to the Midwest. But I got to tell you, I have been so encouraged by what I've seen in spending a week here and a week there, mostly in states that aren't frequented by folks who talk a lot about climate change, to see the initiative and the industry and the enthusiasm undertaken individually, collectively, by state and local governments. There is a nationwide, I guess it's called a caucus on climate and the environment among state legislators. So they've informally gathered to communicate with each other, to talk about initiatives in their states that will work, talk about things that are working and haven't worked, and all that is very positive. So I've concluded over time, and I've been doing this traveling now for a dozen years, that while the American government left the Paris Accords in 2017, and and 19, the American people haven't left. The Conference of U.S. Mayors, hundreds of them signed a letter saying that their cities were still in the Paris Accord, and they've continued to behave that way. They haven't just said it. The C40 cities, the Bloomberg initiatives, so many other things have been undertaken, and there's so much great work going on in regions and states around the country that our viewers here ought to have confidence that so many Americans are ready and anxiously awaiting our rejoining the Paris Accords, but they haven't been idle in the meantime. And so we've got a lot to look forward to. I think the Biden administration, certainly after the first 100 days, needs to show that it can do a good job capturing this energy and this enthusiasm, translating it into a national movement. And with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Admiral, thank you, and thank you also for mentioning the travel you do. Many of those trips you've done in affiliation with ASP, and we wouldn't be able to communicate all this without you and our other board members.
Thanks, Andrew.
Alex, over to you. You lead ASP's climate and security work. What are we missing, and what sort of stuff should we be looking forward to in 2021 and beyond?
Yes, so thanks, Andrew. First, I want to thank the Congressman Ambassador and Admiral Gunn for joining us today. Their remarks have been an excellent way to kick off this discussion. To leave ample time for question and answer, I'll be very brief with my remarks. A new administration and Congress offer an opportunity to reevaluate our climate strategy. This is especially true given the emphasis President-elect Biden has placed on climate change and his appointment of Secretary John Kerry as Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change. As Admiral Gunn just mentioned, ASP is thrilled about that. So I'm going to offer 4 points that I think policymakers should consider when doing this reevaluation of our climate policy. The first point is that the US and China must find a way to cooperate. The relationship between China and the US has deteriorated over the last few years. And as the world's largest emitters, the two must find a way to cooperate to reduce carbon emissions. Neither country is immune to the effects of climate change. And so that should be a building block for cooperation. The second point I want to make is that it's no longer possible to separate climate change from geopolitical and geoeconomic interests. I think this is exemplified by the relationship between the US and China, and I'm happy to elaborate on this point more in the Q&A if folks are interested. The third point is, as Admiral Gunn mentioned, the US retreat from leadership by our withdrawal from the Paris Accords gave China an opportunity to expand its influence. China's investing in and exporting clean energy technology, not because it's altruistic, but because it sees it as an investment, sees that investment as an instrument of power. China's the world's largest producer of solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, electric vehicles, but it's also been a top investor in clean energy for 9 out of the last 10 years. While some of that's at home, a lot of it's abroad as well, which is further giving it influence. And the fourth and final point I'd like to make is that the US should utilize our technological prowess as an instrument of power, helping to bolster our alliances and restore our leadership position in the world. The US can catch China if it chooses to strategically invest in clean energy technology. And doing so will serve 3 primary purposes. It'll help it'll help US companies be more competitive vis-a-vis Chinese competitors, strengthening the US's relative power. It'll offer countries an alternative to Chinese developed technology, which is certainly a critical point in this larger debate around Huawei and 5G and the bifurcation of the tech industry. And the third purpose it serves is that it will help reduce US carbon emissions. We'll walk the walk instead of just talk the talk. And through the strategic investment in and export of clean energy technologies, the US can create strong bonds with allies in areas of strategic interest, like South Asia, as Admiral Gunn mentioned, Central America and the Caribbean, as well as demonstrate to climate conscious countries like our NATO partners and other friendly states that border the Arctic, that the US is a climate leader. So I promised I'd be quick and sweet and to the point. So I'll leave it there and leave the rest of the time for Q&A.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks to all of our presenters. I would encourage participants to put questions into the Q&A box below. I see a couple there already, but I'm going to take moderator's privilege to take a note here and maybe ask a quick question for all of our panelists. There was a thread that kind of ran through everybody's talk here, and it does go back to this idea of dialogue. The national security threats of climate change are something that you have to plan for, prepare for, think about. The military is quite good at that. Sometimes our political systems are not as good at that. But, you know, Congressman Langevin was talking about the need for a dialogue and the fact that there was a dialogue between Republicans and Democrats on this issue, something that's lacking in climate. You know, Ambassador Krutnes talked about dialogue in UN Security Council. Admiral Gunn talked about dialogues across the country. Congressman Langevin, maybe you could speak a little bit about how there's a way to use this as a way to bridge divides across the bipartisan gap, and then same thing across to our other panelists.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So dialogue is absolutely important. And I think, you know, one of the things we can do is try to perhaps find the language that works on both sides and addressing it from the point of view of, you know, where do we find some common ground? And I've specifically in my efforts to find that common ground have avoided talking about per se the causes of climate change, even though I clearly believe they are in large part man-made, man-caused, that we could, you know, do a lot more if we stop pumping fossil fuels into the atmosphere and of course deal with the ocean acidification and so many other things. But I've tried to find that where those common ground areas are, and I find that, and when you talk about how do we spend taxpayer dollars wisely, and it makes no sense to throw good dollars after bad dollars, you know, good dollars after good dollars, if you will, and wasting taxpayer dollars. If we know that there are effects of climate change that are happening and that are going unaddressed, things that perhaps could be prevented. So we have to ensure that we're spending dollars wisely when we make investments in military capabilities, whether at home or abroad. We really have to be able to maintain those capabilities over time. You think about the bases that we built, looking at where we are right now, and are there things that we could do to preserve those bases and prevent damage being done by severe storms? Or if we're going to be building new bases, you know, let's not sidestep sound building practices. Let's build, you know, more inland or anticipate ahead. You know, what happens if we have to deal with sea level rise? How do we build to standards that can withstand severe storms? You know, there's often on military bases, federal installations can avoid adhering to local zoning requirements because it's a federal facility. We should not allow that to happen. We should build to those local standards. So that again, we're building resilience again. So you know, we have to, when we fail to consider the effects of climate change at the beginning, for example, the acquisition process, then those capabilities can be jeopardized. Just one concrete example I'll give you: the Air Force built a radar installation in the Marshall Islands to track space debris in low Earth orbit at a cost of over $1 billion. Now that facility is supposed to last for more than 25 years, but it only became operational in 2020. However, current projections show that its operations could be compromised by sea level rise in as little as 2 decades, and meaning that the installation is not going to be viable for its full 25-year projected lifespan. So that's, I try to, let's try to find the common ground areas where, look, we can agree to disagree perhaps on the causes of climate change, but the fact that it's happening, we have to find a common ground, common sense approach to dealing with those effects and mitigating them.
Quick follow-up, Congressman. We have a question here from the audience, who is a constituent of Representative Stefanik. Do you anticipate continuing to work with her as you have in past Congresses on this issue, or what do you see going forward there?
I'm sorry. So luck would have it, what you were breaking up as you were asking your question. I'm sure it's on my end, but can you try it again?
Sure. We have a constituent of Congresswoman Elise Stefanik as a participant here, and he's asking if you anticipate continuing to work with her in the new Congress.
Yeah, I absolutely do. In fact, Elise Stefanik really was my partner in helping to get the climate change language into the 2018 NDAA. So it was a bipartisan effort. And then she joined with me. She was my chief partner in helping to battle against the efforts of Congressman Perry to strip the climate change language out that acknowledged the climate change is a national security threat. She joined with me and was very instrumental in getting those 46 Republicans to join with us to prevent the language from being stripped out. So I absolutely anticipate continue to work with Elise. She's my ranking member on the subcommittee that I chair right now, and she's been a great partner.
Great, thank you. Ambassador, I guess a follow-up here, like we see this is a possible way to build bipartisan dialogue here in the United States. Is the security issue of climate change perhaps an angle in to help overrun some of the international divides on the issue? Some of the countries you mentioned who don't think that it should be a security issue in the UN. Is this an angle that can kind of help pull them into further debate and dialogue?
Yes, it could be. And I think what has been said about building bridges, both within this great country, but also internationally, is very important. I think it's hugely important now that the US and China will be able to cooperate on this, as well as Russia. But I wanted to say another thing about getting a bipartisan agreement on climate. I will not say anything about American politics. That's not my job. But I think it's very important to involve industry in this and finding technological solutions. And as long as there is a feeling that going green is costly, it is difficult to do it. But once you understand that actually it's you can be rewarded financially by finding new and green solutions, that is so important. And it's very tempting to and we were talking about, Alex was talking about making the American industry competitive and finding new technological solutions. Norway is the country where we have most electric cars, and every second new car that is put on the road is an electric car. And a huge amount of them are Teslas. They are American. And Elon Musk is the one who really renewed the car park in Norway and make our cities so nice and clean. So you do have some good technology here in the US, but you should continue that, because you need the industry and business to drive parts of this. Yeah,
clean and quiet. Another benefit.
You know, there's a button you can put a motor sound on it.
Admiral Gunn, I'm going to give you a tough question here. We've got a couple from the chat here about geoengineering and Arctic ice restoration and efforts to slow global warming and climate change through these methods. Do you think that this is something that should be followed through on? And if so, what's the best forum to start getting international cooperation and sea ice restoration? I'm going to give you the easy one.
Oh yeah, thanks very much. Ambassador Krutnes can probably handle the ice piece far better than I. I've been struck by some of the activity in the research arena with regard to geoengineering and other solutions. To step back for just a second, I think most of the people who've thought seriously about climate change and remediation and adaptation believe that some level of carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration is required as part of the mix. There are lots of steps we need to take, but that's an important part of the mix. As a matter of fact, Norway has the Longship project, which is extraordinary and impressive and deserves to be examined by people around the world who are interested in CCUS. Geoengineering is often touted as the silver bullet in this. I personally have not seen anything that convinces me that that we need to do anything other than to do our homework, to work hard, to establish consensus on how to deal with this. And to the last point that was made with regard to dialogue, to have in the United States at least, have the American industrial and commercial enterprises out front. Because one thing that will turn around, I think, the most convinced denier in this country is the fact that it becomes economically imperative that the job prospects are such that we must not only transition to advanced energy, but lead that transition, do our part to lead that transition in the United States and elsewhere. One of the problems with geoengineering, and then I'll stop, is that every potential solution that I've heard of being examined requires some sort of high-level international cooperation and agreement on its effects and the predictability of those effects. And neither of those, I think, are solved problems. We all share the seas, we all share the air. These are, in fact, the global commons. And having this or that country or this or that region mess with them is done at great risk, I believe. It reminds me not to mess with Mother Nature, which we are doing quickly anyway. But that's
already have an uncontrolled experiment.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe we shouldn't mess with that even more. Alex, there's a question here that I'd like to get your take on. I guess there's two related one here. You call for renewed cooperation between the U.S. and China, but of course there is a growing global competition between the U.S. and China. It's a competition across economic, geopolitical, military, and others. So I want to get a kind of your thought on how you square that. And then there's another question here on competition in the Arctic, eyeing both the Chinese Polar Silk Road and Russian adventurism and remilitarization of the Arctic. What's the play on international geopolitics here?
Thanks for the question. Both are great. To the first question, I think it's really important that the U.S. be able to walk and chew gum when it comes to China. We need to be able to both cooperate and compete with China in all of the arenas that you just mentioned. It shouldn't be a binary choice. And in terms of cooperation, I think there are three fundamental things that the U.S. needs to do to restart climate cooperation with China. There needs to be, the first one is there needs to be a willingness to meet China in the middle. Neither country is immune to the effects of climate change, and they're the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases. And so that should be, you know, a building block, like I said earlier, for restarting cooperation. And this is not unprecedented, right? The US and China have cooperated on climate change in the past, in 2014 with the bilateral agreement, which was fundamental to the Paris Accords. So we just kind of need to restart where we kind of left off. The second thing is the US needs to walk the walk instead of just talk the talk. And I think that that is fundamental to restarting cooperation with China. During the Obama administration, when there was a strong domestic push on climate change is when we saw the most out of the bilateral relationship with China. And President Xi knows President-elect Biden has an ambitious climate agenda. And so, you know, there are lots of factions within China that are kind of waiting to see how President-elect Biden manages his ambitious climate plans. The third point on cooperation is that, and I think President-elect Biden has already done this, climate change needs to be fundamental to our national security strategy. And in a broad sense, it needs to be fundamental to our national security strategy. The military effects or the climate change effects on the US military are certainly important, but this needs to be a whole of government approach to climate change and national security. And when it comes to competition, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, and the ambassador mentioned, and Admiral Gunn mentioned, and the congressman also mentioned, we need to, in terms of competition with China, there's opportunity in the clean tech industry, clean energy tech industry. And I think rather than trying through US policy to hold China down, you know, whether it's, we're talking about Huawei or 5G, we need to provide an alternative rather than try to constrain China. When we've done that in the past, when we've forced our allies to choose, you know, China or the US, it hasn't always worked out the best for the US. You know, the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank is a perfect example. More recently, some of the American policy analysts who were frustrated with the EU's trade agreement with China, they, you know, not form officially, but, you know, put a little bit of pressure on the EU saying, can't we wait? I think that we need to provide an alternative rather than try and constrain China. On the Arctic geopolitics, I'm sure the ambassador has a personal take on this from her experience, but also Norway's got a lot at stake there. So I'm curious, I'd like to actually throw the ball over to her and see if she wants to chime in here on that point.
Ambassador Krutnes, you've led Norwegian engagement with the Arctic Council, and I would be really interested to hear from you. We have a specific question here on how the Norwegian government looks to the pros and cons of economic gain in the Arctic, and how other Arctic nations think about that. But, you know, just more broadly, you know, the Arctic is this zone of competition now. What does Norway see and feel about that?
Well, thank you. And I see we have 6 minutes left.
I know. It's an hour question.
Let me very briefly comment on this restoring the sea ice. That is not a solution I think has any serious prospect. And what we have to do is to stop the further melting of the ice. And the melting is caused by emissions, global emissions. So that is not something the Arctic countries can do by themselves. All the countries have to cut emissions. So that is a global problem, and it should be treated in global forests, such as the Paris Accord. Well, the effect of the ice melting is, as the question pointed to, that resources are becoming more available. That goes for energy resources as well as fishery resources and maybe also sea roads. I'm talking about the northern sea road. Yes, there are pros and cons, of course. If you believe that we will still need fossil energy, the idea that there are a lot of, we know that there are a lot of gas resources that are becoming more available. Gas is a more climate-friendly energy resource than coal, and it could be a transition resource on a way to becoming greener. And then, of course, that could be seen as a positive effect. But there is no doubt that from Norway's point of view, we are worried about the melting of the ice. We are worried about the climate change, and if it could be undone, if we could stop the climate change, that is, of course, our preferred outcome of this. The cons of the climate change is so much bigger than the pros. But I guess the question was not, do we want the climate change or not? But the effect is there. What are the pros and the cons? The Northern Sea Road is not going to be the preferred route during the next years. There is still too much ice, too difficult to get there. There's a lot of what we call destination traffic from the Russian gas fields going eastwards to China with gas. And when there's too much ice, they go west to Europe. I think my final point on this will be that all the myths about fight for resources, a race for resources, and the geopolitics in that is a bit it's made more dramatic than it is. This region is governed by international law. It is governed by the law of the sea. There are very clear rules where the fishery zones are, where the continental shelf limits are, etc., etc. And so far, all the Arctic countries play by the book. I'm saying that when it comes to claims for continental shelf, and we know that Russia has made such claims, well, they are according to the book. They play it by the book. So I think that is not as dramatic as some pretend to paint that picture. You mentioned the militarization. That is a worry. Russia is building up, and their nuclear base, their submarine base is just across the border from Norway. So that is, of course, a worry to us. But again, and there's a lot of talk about China's interest in the region. I don't see China as a military threat in the region. I think they are there because they are always have a very long time perspective, and they are looking at the possibilities for in the long run to get access to some resources there. But again, things are so far according to rules, and the area is very well regulated.
Right. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over quickly to Congressman Langevin. Thank you. We know you have to go at 4 here, but if you wanted to say any final words, we had a question here of, what can people do in their own lives to impact policy here? What do you tell people on how to impact Congress?
Yeah, communicate with their congressmen and senators. Never underestimate the impact that can have. I often tell constituents or non-constituents, if you want to affect policy changes, you have to be vocal. If you're silent on the issue, then the issue either gets ignored, or other more pressing things will get a member of Congress's attention. So you need, or if we don't hear from you, then we've got to use our best judgment as to what we think, how the the electorate feels, as opposed to hearing directly from people. So, democracy and it's not a spectator sport. We better all be involved, not only voting on election day, but communicating throughout the year. So I would say stay engaged, stay involved, and know that you can have an impact.
Great. Thank you, sir. And thanks to all of our panelists. We've come up to 4 o'clock here. I think it was a great panel, great discussion. We've put up links within the chat for all the participants to take a look at. If you want more, you can always see more on our website, americansecurityproject.org. We'll have a summary and the video of this event up on there as well. Thank you all. Normally we'd hear a round of applause, but in COVID times here, it's the sound of one hand clapping. But thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew.
Have a great afternoon. And join us tomorrow and the next day to all of our participants for further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.